Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to Between the Before and After. As always, I'm excited for today's guest, and we tried to record earlier. It didn't quite work out due to some technical difficulties, so this brings us back this space. But you know what? I think it's the universe's way of saying, hey, we just needed a little bit more time to live a little bit more life and come up with an epic conversation today. So it is my pleasure to welcome Sherrie Barch to the show. How you doing today, Sherrie?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, John.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to dive into your story because I think it's a really, really interesting one. I'd love to know how, a CEO, an executive got to writing a children's book about death and dying. But kind of before we dive into that, how about we give people a little snapshot of where you're at right now with life?
Sure. So my day job is I am the CEO of 3 companies, 2 executive search companies, and 1 leadership consulting company. I'm the mom of 3 boys.
Yeah.
And I have a husband who is a judge, and he has some interesting stories, speaking of storytelling. And
we just might have to connect with him and bring him on the show as well. I'm sure there's things he probably can't talk about based on the legalities and things, but I've never had a judge on the show before. I've had CEOs before. I've never had a judge on the show. So maybe this is me calling it out, saying if he'd be open to it, I'd love to interview him as well. And that would make
all right. Well, I'll talk to him about that over dinner tonight.
That sounds fantastic. So CEO of 3 companies. You said 2 executive search firms and then a leadership consulting firm. And I think, one company can be a challenge to run, and you're the chief executive officer of 3 companies.
Yes.
How does one sort of find their way into, well, I'm navigating or leading 3 companies?
Right. Well, actually, I started out of grad school applying for jobs, thinking that the search firm was going to find me a job, and fast forward 3 decades, and I'm leading it. So that's in a nutshell what happened. But basically, and it goes with what my degrees are in. My degrees are in business communication. I have some journalism and management minors, but it's about curiosity, and it's about people's stories and being able to be a good listener. And it's been a great career. I get to fly all over the world and meet very interesting, successful people. People that I watched derail their careers, but people that I watched build their careers, and just really learned a lot from people's stories. And I think it's interesting because years ago I was being coached, and in one of the things I was reading, the question was, "What's your superpower?" I really couldn't come up with one. I'd have no talent. I can't sing, play a musical instrument, or juggle. And so I think I'm a nice person. That was the biggest superpower that I could come up with. And then my youngest son was walking by when I was having this conversation with my husband, and he said, "Mom, your superpower is storytelling."
I love that.
And so that kind of set me on my journey as far as being able to share this story. And so decided to write it down.
So kind of thinking back to childhood and whatnot, I imagine when you were a kid, maybe you didn't really picture that I'm going to be the CEO of 3 firms and writing a best-selling book. What did you envision you were, as kids often have dreams, what did you picture you were kind of going to do with your life growing up?
I always thought I would do maybe some kind of entertainment. And again, not having any skill sets, I think more around my friends have sometimes called me the white Oprah, or,
Okay.
back in my day it was Barbara Walters,
Mm-mm.
where not the mean interviewers that try to catch people, but kind of like what you're doing, right? Where you're just exploring people's stories and bringing their gifts and their perspectives to the world. So I always
Yeah.
thought I would just, I don't know, maybe be on TV and be an interviewer.
Okay. Yeah. Did you ever, when kids like play make believe, did you ever play that as a kid where you would like set up and like interview your mom or your dad or your friends or anything like that?
No, not really. I wrote a neighborhood newspaper though, and interviewed people for the newspaper. So maybe it's somewhere in there.
When did you develop a neighborhood newspaper?
Oh, it was probably fifth grade. It only
Okay.
lasted a summer, but it
Right.
was
Right.
fun.
Well, so that was already sort of beginning to unpack a little bit of talent that you have there.
Yeah, maybe.
What prompted this idea of like, because, pardon me, in grade five, you'd probably be around 10 years old. Is that right?
Mhm.
And you're like, I want to write a neighborhood newspaper. And did you bring this idea to your parents? And what did they think of this?
Oh, no. No, I just did it. I did it with some friends and just went around the neighborhood and then, wrote it out because we didn't have copy machines, right? So we just
Yeah.
wrote them out and then
Like
passed them out to the neighbors.
literally just like writing by hand the
Mhm.
same thing over and over again and think, well, and in your 10-year-old brain, if you can, maybe it's a couple of years back, but if you can recall, like, you know, um, you're doing this. Did you have an idea of like what you wanted to accomplish? Like, this is just a fun thing to do, or maybe I hope this makes my neighbor's day better, or what was sort of the inspiration behind this?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think I've always been high affiliation, so I'm always about bringing people together and making sure that everybody's able to help one another. And I'm probably a little nosy. That's my journalism minor, right? And
Yeah,
or
yeah.
maybe interested and curious is the way to say it. But
Mm-mm-mm.
I was always very social and wanted to know what was going on in the neighborhood. And if there was a garage sale coming up or somebody had something for sale, let's get the word out.
Right, right. I think I prefer curious to nosy,
Yeah, there you
but
go.
it's I mean, and I'm that way too. I just love exploring people's stories and kind of what makes them tick. And so, did anything? I'm curious if you had any sort of interesting responses to this newsletter. I wonder what adults would kind of think of. And did you interview anybody?
It's been so long. I know it was just kind of one summer, and we just tried to put some stories together and illustrate it. And you know, I can't really even remember if anybody read it.
Fair enough. Um, and was it your idea, or and you roped your friends in, or was it kind of a joint idea?
Um, Probably a combination of the two. There might have been some roping that needed to happen.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
friend was a good
Uh,
speller, so I think I needed her to proof.
Yeah, that's funny. But that was kind of a little bit of a precursor to what you might end up doing in a sense. And so,
Yeah.
as you were going through high school, was there again any inclination that you were, hey, you know what, I like that newspaper thing. Maybe I'll try to be a journalist or a reporter.
Uh, no, even though in my degrees I had that journalism minor, I think it was more just about communicating, and the different mediums to be able to do that. But that journalism degree, I think, just helped hone some of those writing skills, but not in the way of making a living with it or being an author. That was really never on my radar.
Mm-mm. So, as you were like heading out of high school and into university, maybe you got a clear idea of what you wanted to do in your future. What was on your, I guess, your radar for this is maybe actually what I want to do, with life.
More around teaching and training and honestly leading, managing, being able to bring the power of teams together.
Mm.
So again, very social, very high affiliation. So joined a lot of groups. I think was able to make a difference in the university and the communities that I was in with that skill.
Yeah, yeah. Excuse me. And so, well, did you start your companies one at a time, or was it kind of multiple things happened at once, or and maybe when did your first company start up?
Well, I joined the company that I now run
Hmm.
back right after my graduate degree. And
Okay.
then a small group of us bought that company
Mm.
probably 4 or 5 years into my tenure. And then we actually started the leadership consulting company. And that was an idea that we came up with because there were a lot of people inside organizations that I don't think were getting a fair shake. Women,
Hmm.
minorities, other people that were maybe buried. That the C-suite, the people that were in charge, would go hire a recruiting firm without necessarily assessing their internal candidates or succession planning.
Interesting.
So leadership, right? Leadership consulting teams. And then probably 5 years ago, we purchased another executive search organization um,
Okay.
that does some different kinds of searches. So yeah, it just kind of built through what we know.
Yeah. So you said something interesting there. 5 years into your tenure with the company, and it was after graduate studies. So maybe if I'm doing my math correctly, were you still in your 20s at this time when
Mhm.
you and you have this idea of let's buy this company?
Well,
Like,
yeah, we did. I mean, there were some things that were moving forward. Our market was exploding, and the then company that owned us really wasn't moving as quickly and didn't have the
mhm,
same vision that we did. So we were much smaller,
mhm, mhm.
but really started from the ground up. I mean,
So,
truly from scratch.
pardon me. And when you say we, who is this small group of people, and how do you come together and decide we're going to buy this company and take it in a different direction? Because I think this is a world that a lot of people they're not even really aware that this world they hear of these things, but it's like how does something like this actually take place? Like, was it clear that as you were working with this company that hey, I'm pretty good at this, and were you climbing the corporate ladder at that point, or what put you in a position to be able to purchase a company?
Right. It was more a small entrepreneurial um, initiative. So it wasn't like it was breaking off of a large corporate entity. And I think what we knew is that in order for us to be successful in the marketplace that we needed to be in, we needed to go in a different direction. So
Mm,
regardless of whether it was going to be successful or not, we knew it was definitely not going to be successful if we stayed. And so through
mm.
the years, a lot of those individuals are retired or have left the organization or are no longer with us. But back then, it was just it was a small group of people that said, "Let's give it a shot."
And when you say like go in a different direction, what direction was the company like? Because of course, probably the function of the company was probably more complex than you can summarize in a 30-second nutshell kind of thing. But you said it was going in a wrong direction. You need to move it in a different direction. What
No,
direction was it?
the
Sorry.
individual ended up leaving and going to a different job. So
Okay.
he went to into a different direction. We've stayed. I mean, what we started out doing and what we're doing today. I mean, very different, obviously, but
Mm-mm. With
the
the advent of
same
the internet and whatnot.
core. Mhm.
Yeah. So, once the company was purchased, the group of you that kind of purchased it, were you then did you form like the new board or the new C-suite, or what did that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we hired employees, brought in leaders, had offices all over the nation.
And so, and what exactly does an executive search company do, I guess? Like, what does that look like, because to the average person, I'm like, I don't know. What that sounds like, well, like Google is a search engine, so what exactly does a company like that?
So what we do is we're retained executive search firms, and so what we do is get hired by our client to find leaders and talent, and we specialize in that kind of C-suite vice president level. And so what we will do then is receive a retained agreement from our client, and then go out into the marketplace and look for talent, and then present that talent to our client and place someone.
So a company will come to you and say, "Hey, we have an outgoing vice president. We need to find a new one. Maybe there isn't a suitable candidate within the company itself. Can you locate someone who would be a good fit for this?"
Correct.
And that could span like multiple industries, could it? Like,
Sure.
i-
Depending on what they're looking for. If it's a healthcare client, then we probably stay in that healthcare lane. But if it's non-healthcare and there's other specialty talents or competencies needed, then we'll tailor a search for that.
and so were you doing this prior to the internet?
Yes.
Okay, so prior to the advent of the internet, how did you go? How would you go about like finding someone who is like vice president kind of material prior to the internet?
So I would go to the library. I would use phone books. I would go to conferences. I would call people and ask for their network or their opinions.
So old school way. I mean, like I grew up like I'm a child of the 80s, right? So I mean, I grew up. I didn't get internet until I was like 12, 13 years old. So I mean, I still remember what it was like not to have it. But to and I remember even like writing a term paper and still not using internet all that much when I was in university. I literally went to the library. I'd pull out these books and I had these cue cards and I'd write like one note on each cue card and basically that's how I developed the essay kind of thing. So you're like looking at the yellow pages, you're calling up people being like, hey, do you know somebody who wants to be the vice president of a company? But obviously it's not just entirely out of the blue, but maybe it took like, how long might it take you to find a suitable candidate?
Today, it will take us it depends on the level and the specifications and some of the specialties that might go around or the kinds of competencies looking for, but it could take anywhere between 4 and 6 months.
Really? Okay.
Mhm.
So a company, if they're looking for someone, should understand there's going to be a window of time because obviously this is also like a really important role that someone's going to fill. You don't necessarily want to just grab the first person that comes along and goes like, you more or less fit, you know.
Right.
There's kind of a process you have to go through to find like the right person, and obviously in one sense your reputation is at stake if you maybe don't find the right person. Have there been any instances where maybe you did put a candidate forward and it didn't work out and it kind of blew back on you?
Well, we guarantee our placements.
Okay.
So if somebody doesn't work out, then we continue the search. But it happens very rarely. But we interview pretty rigorously, and we've got um, assessments that we use, and we've got some very, very skilled recruiters. And
Mhm,
we
mhm.
also want to make sure that that individual wants this role, so we try to be very authentic and very truthful in what that looks like and where the challenges might be culturally or as it relates to the marketplace and what's being introduced. So there's a
Yeah,
lot of
and
facets to it.
there is, and depending on like what you're able to share, what's maybe been the most interesting or unusual maybe client that you've worked for?
Um, I mean, they're all unusual or special and in their own ways. I mean, we have a lot of clients that are in healthcare. So I think over the last couple of years with COVID, it's been interesting to watch how these organizations stepped up and really retooled what they were doing and making sure that we had a client that was a children's hospital that did specialized surgeries that turned their whole hospital into a COVID hospital to be
Wow.
able to
Okay.
help save lives. Our leadership consulting company turned our um, the current contracts that we had into crisis management and leadership contracts to make sure that we were supporting the physician leaders or the leaders of these healthcare institutions.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's amazing to work around and with some really outstanding leaders that, especially over the last couple of years, have, I think, made a huge difference in our world.
Yeah. So, in and amongst like all of this sort of corporate environment and whatnot, you found someone or met someone who maybe was a judge, not a judge at the time, maybe a lawyer, but that would become your husband along the way. Where did you meet him?
In college. So,
Okay,
yeah, that was that was 3 decades ago.
three decades ago.
Well, almost
Okay,
4 decades ago. Yeah,
fair. Hey, congratulations! If it's been that
thank
long,
you.
that's quite an accomplishment. Um, how did you bump into each other, and what struck you about him the first time you met?
We were bartenders together, and
Ah,
I didn't quite like him. I
really?
thought he was kind of, I don't know. But through fate, we ended up dating, and he was very smart and very sarcastic and very kind, and
Yep.
that was all she wrote.
Right. Okay. So your bartending is this like at a college bar or a
Yeah.
local bar? College bar, bartending. And would you like bartend shifts together? Is that how you kind of bumped into each other, or?
Yes.
And
Yes.
did you have any of the skills like flipping the bottles and
Oh,
fancy things like that?
no,
Just
no, not at all.
yeah. So there wasn't any kind of competition in terms of how to make a drink with the most elaborate flourish.
That's right. No, not even close. Not even close.
So you at first were like, I don't know if I like this guy. There's something about him that kind of rubs me the wrong way. But he must have spotted something in you and go, well, I feel differently about this.
Yeah.
Was he the one that made the first move then?
Oh, I don't know about first moves. I think it was gradual. It was a long courtship. I ended up I ended up staying for grad school. He was a little bit older than me. I graduated. He decided to go to law school, which is another 3 years. So, I mean, it was, we were busy working on our careers. And then when he was in law school, I started the business. So, I mean, all that timeline, that first decade, it was busy, but I think the universes aligned and we were able to head on our path together.
I think it's fascinating that you use the term courtship because nowadays we live in this age of like internet dating and things like Tinder and stuff like that that really I believe there's something kind of lost in the development of a relationship when we try to short circuit and take a shortcut in a way. And again, going back to this was happening sort of in pre-internet days. What did courtship look like spanning that decade? Like was there a period of time where you're together, not together, that kind of thing? How did you communicate when you were apart? Like how did that relationship sort of foster and grow?
Yeah, I mean, phones with cords on them,
What?
right? What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm not so old that we were letter writing, but I mean, honestly, it was, and there was planfulness around. We didn't have texts or cells or, and so it was just phones,
and you had to kind of maybe plan in advance. I'm going to call you at this time.
right? Right? You
So
remember?
was it like at the end of the call? Hey, so next I'm gonna call you next at this time. Like, did you have to arrange like the
I
next
don't even
time to call?
remember. That's a great question. I have no idea. I
It's
have
fun.
no idea.
I just think it's fascinating, thinking about this now because I think some of these things kind of get lost to history, right? And
Mhm.
it's a part of your story and how you got to where you did. So ultimately, you ended up in the place where um, you decided that you were going to get married. What made you realize, after all of this, that, okay, this guy's the guy?
Um, I mean, I guess, you just know, right? So I think even as he started law school and I was working, I just think if it was going to be, it was going to be. And it just, it worked.
Yeah. How did he, or did he propose? And if so, how did he go about doing that?
Oh, he, um, he took me out to eat and it was at a restaurant and he had the maitre d' brought over some roses. And I thought, well, what is this all about? And then he proposed.
Okay. And the answer was at that point it was yes.
Yes, it was, yeah.
That's awesome, and it's funny because I mean I don't know maybe how much you even thought about that. Maybe some of it just kind of gets lost to history a little bit, and you go, well, it's just kind of water under the bridge. But it's kind of nice to look at that sort of that human aspect of it because it's to me it's fascinating, sort of understanding the trajectory of kind of your corporate career arc. But I think there's a real human element to this as well. That you're like a real person with a more whole and complete story.
Yes.
And yeah. So when you became a mom, did that sort of affect how these companies ran? Did you take step away from them for a period of time, or you can like maybe mat leave wasn't a thing because you're an executive, or
Well, it was a small company, so we didn't have maternity leave. I mean, I had maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and I just, I loved what I do. I think I had great support systems, but I always knew that I would work. And we have 3 boys, and
yeah.
I think I think in work can be defined, right? I mean, I think we as women have to make decisions that work for us. And
Hmm.
sometimes that decision that works for us is that I'm going to stay home for this period of time. And, I want to be the primary caregiver of my child, 24/7. And
Yep.
sometimes the decision is I am a better mom by working and being able
Providing and
to. Mhm. So I think, I as a leader want to make sure that I am creating opportunities for people to make those decisions and have an open and authentic environment around what that decision needs to be, so that we can be planful. And I've retained employees that have left and had kids and wanted to stay with their children, and then have come back and asked, can I come back, or is there opportunities to work as an independent consultant? And so it's been a great journey when you can approach it holistically. And I think we all have to
yeah.
make our own decisions.
One of the things, so I'm from Canada, as most of my listeners are going to know, but my wife got 18 months of mat leave,
That's wonderful.
and she had the option of 12 and the option to extend it. So when she was coming up in the 12 months, she was like, no, I want to extend it another 6 months,
Yeah.
and she had that opportunity. And now having like the privilege of kind of witnessing firsthand like motherhood and watching her, and her bond with her little boy and things like that, like it to me, I think like it was really special that she had that opportunity, and she always had a choice in it.
Mhm.
Like she could have gone back sooner and whatnot, but she was like, I don't want to. I just love my little boy and I love being with him, and she's back working now. But um, I don't know that there's that much like even to this day, like that there's that much opportunity for mat leave in a lot of places, like where that would be an option where you get 12 months or 18 months. Like oftentimes I hear that maybe you only get offered 4 or 6 weeks, and there isn't really anything on the table for being like beyond that.
Right. No, that is true. I mean, I think that that is a significant difference between um, Canada and the United States and other places. I mean, I think,
Mm-mm.
um, yeah, and then depending on the size of your organization and your rights around that, paternity leave as well. It's. I think it is important.
Yeah, yeah, and I think because I view motherhood as like probably the pinnacle profession in one sense, just in that like there's such a crucial or essential role in like shaping future humans, really.
Right.
Like
Literally, right.
what more influential, and you think about the first 7 years of a child's life, and like pardon me, what more influential like position to be in than to be the mother to a child, and or the child having like caregivers that are properly caring for them. So um I I appreciate organizations and countries and societies that set up where they give mothers the opportunity to be that if they so choose.
Yes. Agree.
Yeah. So and at some point in time, then just to shift gears a bit here, your husband, because I'm curious about how your husband became a judge, and it's kind of a different role than being a lawyer in one sense, because I guess you're presiding over things. Is that in and of itself a stressful profession, or does it depend on the types of cases that are being adjudicated?
Yeah, I think it's a very stressful. I don't know if that's the vibe I get. I think it's more it's impactful. It's impactful.
Mhm.
I think there's opportunities. When something comes in front of a judge, it's interpretation of law. It's not because
Mm-mm.
somebody doesn't know the law. So you've got very smart people saying we need a judge because the interpretation of the law is needed. And so he's very good at fact gathering, and being able to make the best decision he can as it relates to the circumstances that are presented.
Mhm,
I think the
mhm.
biggest difference was as an attorney. There's client attorney privileges, so we really went through majority of our relationship with him as a lawyer that we really didn't talk about his job
Yeah,
because
fair
he
enough.
couldn't. But as a
Right,
judge, it's all public. So
right.
even through the
Fascinating.
pandemic, where people couldn't go into the courtrooms, there were YouTube channels set up,
Mhm.
and it is the public's right to have access to those
Yeah.
forums. So it kind of created a different opportunity to get to know a little bit more about how he thinks and what he delivers in his professional life because we could talk about it.
Yeah, fascinating. Did you ever find yourself kind of like itching with, because I spent time in the military, and there's times that we would go out on operations, and it was like, I'm gone, but I can't tell you what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I'm like, that's got to be like, it was really hard for my wife, and I'd come back, and she'd be bursting with questions. Like I can't talk about it.
Right,
Like legally, like I'm liable if I speak about this. Like there's criminal prosecution if I do.
right. Yeah,
you know?
no, he was, yeah, I never heard anything about what he was working on for decades.
Yeah, and what does it kind of feel like to be on the end of it? Like, were you ever curious, or did you just kind of accept, "Well, I guess I don't get to know," and be at peace with it?
Oh, yeah, I was at peace with it. I mean, that's not my business. Not unlike the medical profession or anything like that. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
we have something here, HIPAA. I mean, there's just, it's not appropriate.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So, a along the way, you had inspiration to write a book.
Yes,
Yeah, and not just any book, um, but to write a book about dying, and to write a book to children about dying.
yes,
Now
yes.
that to me is fascinating. How did you go from this sort of like high-powered executive kind of life that you're living to thinking, "I need to write a children's story about dying and
Yeah,
death?"
that sounds so funny when you think when you connect those bookends like that, no pun
Mm,
intended. Well, I
great
think
pun. I love puns, by the way.
right. I didn't even do that on purpose, but I'm that gifted, I guess. No. I think what it comes down to is um, difficult conversations. And if I think about
Mm,
leadership and I think about execs that have derailed their careers or done well in their careers or are true leaders, it really is about not backing away from those difficult conversations. And so I'd originally started writing a book about that topic, but I always had
mm,
this children's story, this story called Heaven's Bell in my mind from
mhm,
when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, back in my day, a lot
mhm,
of adults shielded their kids from death and dying. So I never really, I had people that died around me, but I had never gone to the funeral home.
mm, mm,
People would go and then come back, and people were sad, but nobody would really talk about it. And so I carried around this story, and so I called a book coach and said, "Hey, I've got this idea for a story. Would you be interested?" And she said, "No, but tell me more about what you do and why you're interested." So I told her the story I just told you about difficult conversations, and
mhm,
so we started down the path of this other book. Well, then COVID hit, and it uh, there are 8 million children that lost a parent or a primary caregiver, and 10
mm.
million that have lost a grandparent or a secondary caregiver in the world. And so it was 2020. I had started this other book, and I just said to this book coach, I really think we need to look at this book so that we
Mm.
can create a conversation starter, a way to be able to have these difficult conversations. And she read the story the way I had chicken scratched it, and she
Mhm.
said, "Okay."
So, I wanna see if I've got this right. You've seen executives derail their careers,
Mhm.
and is there any connection with that? Because I mean, I think probably the most difficult conversation we as human beings ever have is discussing our mortality.
Right.
The fact that we're all with a limited span, and as time goes on, we become aware of the ticking clock. Like, every day is one day closer to the time that our time draws to a close here on Earth, so to speak.
Right.
Did you were you, like, making any connection between, like, maybe people who were, like, derailing their careers and, like, a fear of death, or, like, some sort of crisis they were going through, coming to terms with the work they were doing in their mortality? Was there some sort of connection there?
Yes, absolutely, and it goes beyond that. I have 2 of my 3 children have type 1 diabetes, and so I remember when one of them was diagnosed, he said, "Well, when am I gonna die?" Because die is in diabetes. So there's a
Oh,
difficult conversation, and
no kidding.
the executives, what it is I think as humans, we have a tendency to avoid hard conversations. So
Mhm.
if you're my boss and I want a raise or I feel like you don't like me, I'm not going to lean into that, right? I'm going to avoid it.
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
bury it. I'm going to make excuses for it. Well, insert any kind of human connection or relationship, and that just wears away at it.
It
So I
does,
was
yeah.
taking all these lessons and stories and being able to apply that and knowing that I had my
Mm,
own story that I think with COVID, it gave me the courage to say, "You know what? It's time. I'm
mm,
gonna release this."
fascinating. So, and in one sense, by opening the door to more children having conversations around death and dying. Perhaps you're planting seeds for future leaders where they're less likely. So it's like a legacy project in a sense as well, or maybe there's leaders that because maybe their parents or caregivers have guided them through this conversation, they're less likely to navigate this in sort of a tumultuous way that leads them off the rails.
Yeah, it's even a little bit more weird than that. If you think about it, this book isn't probably going to be purchased by the child. But we have a lot of adults that aren't good with death and dying. So if we can look at this story, which is just a very innocent story about two middle schoolers, will we be able to help adults, maybe some that are, a mom or a dad that lost their husband or their wife, and be able to help their child talk about death and dying? I was just at a grief. I was at it was Children's Grief Awareness Day last Thursday, and I was at a hospice, and they had third grader all the way up to a senior in high school, and these children were talking very freely about their feelings and that they miss their dad or their grandma and and you saw a lot of people in the audience get really uncomfortable, and they asked them, what are some things that people say that make you that aren't helpful? What are some things that people do that are helpful? It's just a conversation. If we can just get to the conversation, we might be able to have a little bit of brightness or joy that goes along with the grief journey that so many of us are experiencing from this pandemic.
Yeah, and I've interviewed a number of people who've been through a lot of grief, and one lady who is maybe a grief specialist who's had 4 husbands die.
Mm.
And yet she still is able to navigate life with a sense of grace and peace, which to me was extremely fascinating. I'm like, how do we do that? I'm so fortunate that I still have my parents. Like my first grandfather, like my mom's dad, I never met. He died before I was born. My other grandfather lived overseas, and I saw him once in my life that I remember. He really had very little connection with us, and he was a World War II veteran who had been captured and a prisoner of war and traumatized and never understood how to navigate that. So he never really had a connection with us as grandchildren. And then my gran also lived overseas. And so I would only see her maybe once every 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
Maybe only saw her. So I only had one grandparent that I was close to. And when she passed away, I was 22 years old. And, I spoke at the funeral, and I'm a Christian, and my grandmother was as well, and so in the way that I believe, I was really comforted because she'd lived a full, happy life, a life of faith, and as we saw it, she had gone on to a place of rest. And so, but that's really the only major. I mean, I've had friends, I guess, pass away and whatnot. That's been maybe a little bit more difficult. I had a former business partner whose infant daughter passed away at 6 months old. So that there's so many different sort of conversations to be had. But I look back, and I think a lot of times, like, I would have avoided those conversations too, because I didn't really know. For my grandmother, I was like, oh, that's okay. She was 89 or 90 years old. She'd lived a full life. She lived with us for a number of years, so I had a really great. And of course, I was going to miss her, but her faculties were gone, her quality of life was gone, and so we could sort of make peace with it. When a 28-year-old friend dies in a motorcycle accident,
right,
that's a totally different story.
Right. There's fair, right? So the first one you described is, well, that's fair. But when a 28-year-old dies in a motorcycle accident, well, that's unfair, right? Or even you've got, people that by suicide, and there's judgments in the society around that, and what that means. Homicide. There's all different aspects that we will respond to individually in our grieving journey, and there's no right way, but there's so many different ways and different circumstances to try to start that conversation or start the opportunity to say it's okay to talk about this. We have to come together as a community, otherwise it's very, very lonely.
I think it eats away at us on the inside,
right? And it isn't because people don't care, it's that people don't know how.
I think that's really
know. It's uncomfortable for me, and I'm writing about it.
Yeah. And maybe it always will be, but maybe that's the thing that we acknowledge.
Right.
This is an uncomfortable conversation.
Right.
And, in my line of coaching, I do some business mentorship as well, but in the line of sort of nutrition coaching that I do, I often joke that nutrition is the cover story because people's behaviors around food are really a symptom. And so often we want to approach it with like, eat this food, not that food, and things like that. But what we're doing is we're tinkering with the symptoms.
Right.
And so I think about wanting to create the space, like, let's have that real conversation.
There you go.
This isn't
And
about you. Yeah.
that's it. That's what I was trying to accomplish. And when I told my friends about this story, I told it a couple times and it made a difference. It was to a couple of younger people and it switched their behavior right away. They went
Mm,
from being closed and angry to engaging in a conversation with just a few questions, being curious and creating space. But
mm, mm.
most people won't address or want to say, do you have an eating problem? Or are you, let's talk about death. It's just the subject that people are uncomfortable with. And that's
Yeah.
what started the journey. And then when I told my friends, I'm going to write this down, it's a book about two middle schoolers. One dies and goes to
Mhm.
outer space, and the other one lives this long life on Earth. And we've got parallel universes. The book takes the story from the aspect of Cody and the aspect of Ashley. And they just looked at me like, okay, good luck with that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it
And
really isn't a book on death and dying. To me, it's a book about friendship and everlasting love. And I think we all can experience that.
the book is titled Heaven's Bell, and but it sounds like is there necessarily a religious slant to it, or is it just
The
that's just a
really
common terminology that we use to sort of
correct,
say when someone passes away, they go to heaven kind of thing?
correct. It's spiritually impartial. It is really what when we talk about heaven in the book, it's outer space. It's
Mhm,
described like an 11-year-old or a middle schooler would describe it. So no, and it's a fable. It's a story.
mhm,
It's
mhm.
one story that inside of it it just gives you the opportunity to start your own conversations and discussions. It's a safe place when it's not about you or it's not about grandma that just died or it's not just about my
Right.
comrade that I'm missing from the war. It it's just a foundation.
I love that. And so then maybe I could ask you, and maybe it's not an uncomfortable question, maybe it is. Even though you write about this and you speak about this topic and you're addressing it through your storytelling, is dying still something that you're afraid of?
Am I'm not afraid of my own dying,
Mhm.
but I am not comfortable. Um, I'm getting more comfortable, but I've always done a good job of just being me and being authentic and being awkward and being, angry or just being curious around people that are experiencing death. But I think I probably broke a lot of customs and, probably got into some taboo areas because I'm just who I am. And I'm so sorry for your loss is probably not something that came out of my mouth. I'm like, well, I'm mad that he's gone.
Right, yeah,
This is horrible that he got into this motorcycle accident and the world is going to
right,
miss him. And I want to talk about him.
yeah.
What do you think
What
he's doing right now in heaven? What kind of
I
music
love
do you
that,
think
yeah.
he's listening to?
Yeah, yeah, and
But
again,
I'm not good at death and dying. No.
but maybe you actually are inadvertently because this idea that we have to sort of tiptoe around it and like, I'm afraid to talk about this person because I don't want to cause hurt to the other person by bringing them to mind, but it's like they actually want to talk about it.
Right.
So
And
create the space.
bold, I think what we burden ourselves with thinking that we need to know what the right thing is to say
Yeah.
versus silence or
Yeah.
just asking questions. And one of the coolest things that happened with the book is nobody really talked about the story. But what they did is talk about how they felt after they read the story and all they wanted to
Mm,
do was talk about their loved ones. It was the
fascinating.
neatest, weirdest, unexpected thing, and that's fine because it's just but that's what good storytelling prompts, right? It's not
Yeah.
about character development, it's about, "Hey,
Yeah.
when you're all done, how are you feeling?" "Well, you know what I wanna do? I wanna talk about my mom."
Yeah.
I had one woman that said after she read the book, her mom died when she was in high school, And she never wanted to talk about her mom to her kids because she always got sad. And once she read the story, she realized that she was depriving her kids from knowing about this beautiful woman
Mm,
because of her grief. And she was able to start talking about her mom to her
it's
kid.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So, as we kind of wind down here, I guess we should let people know where, and we'll make sure we put this in the show notes as well, but where they could get a copy of the book. And I believe there's also a journal that accompanies it as well. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, and that's what happened after the book came out and people started talking about how they were feeling and wanting to share memories. I decided to start writing down questions. And then my dad died in February, and I decided to keep going with my questions, thinking about how I would answer it. And it ended up dropping on Father's Day on
Okay.
Amazon. The journal
How
did.
about
So
that?
yeah. But anyways, Amazon is a great place. You can go to heavensbell.com, learn more about me and the books, but also you can go to Amazon and you can get access to it there.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I love that you've written a book that's maybe geared towards children, yet adults benefit from
It is
reading this
adults.
through. And it's almost like it makes it safer to talk about it in a sense as well. It's not
That
this heavy encyclopedic tome or something
no,
like that, you know?
no. I've had a couple counselors tell me that, that in trying to recommend books for grieving families, that, they're kind of heavy or they're more like a self-help book. And so that's just too much. But what's nice about this set is, you know, it could be a family journal. It's on Audible. So if it's a young kid, if it's somebody that, maybe has some vision issues, whatever it is, I think it's a
Mm,
common place that the whole entire family can use to be able to start a conversation. The last thing we
absolutely.
want to do is forget about our loved ones that have been such an incredible gift in our lives. So hopefully this
Yeah,
helps create some courage.
absolutely. Well, that's amazing. And it's really been a pleasure chatting with you. You've got a great story. We've poked around quite a variety of aspects, maybe some that haven't come up for a while, but
Yes.
maybe even that in and of itself is good to sort of revive some of those stories yourself. And so, I always like to ask this as we wind up. If you could offer people one nugget to take away from this conversation today, what would you like people to take away?
I would say have the courage to be curious, especially when people are grieving. Lean
Mm.
in and just be courageous.
Sit with them and in those uncomfortable emotions. I love that. Sherrie, thank you so much for being on today. Thank you for entertaining all of my questions. And thank you for writing just a wonderful book that has made a lot of people's journey around death a little bit easier.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure to be here, and I wish you continued success.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.